Hello there everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's Amiibo here, and today we are doing our review of Fantasian Neo Dimension. I think this may be one of 2024's best hidden gems. Of course, thank you to Square Enix for providing me with a PS5 review code so I could play the game. However, you all know me, I did buy myself a copy on Switch with my own money. I would also like to say thank you to Square Enix for providing me with a Steam code for Dragon Quest III 2D HD. If you want a chance to win that, just watch the video. I'm going to put up the segments of the code throughout the video. Whoever gets it, gets it. And if you do get the code, let me know in the comments down below if you redeemed it. So thank you to them for giving that code to give away. Let's talk about Fantasian. I've been very excited for this game ever since it was announced on Apple Arcade, right? Like, it was, I believe, released on Apple Arcade back in 2021. This is a new game from the creator of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi, and his team at Mistwalker. They've done a lot of other stuff over the years, like Blue Dragon for Xbox 360, as well as The Last Story for Wii. Nintendo published that game. But now we have Fantasian Neo Dimension, a console version of the Apple Arcade game that came out a couple years ago. And this is something I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, you know? This is a mobile game that came to console. I was expecting it to be like a pretty short, hop, skip, and a jump through, right? Like, I was expecting maybe a 20, 30-hour RPG. This game is like the length of Metaphor. This is an extremely, extremely long game. So going into it, know that this is not like a bite-sized RPG like I was expecting. This is a huge JRPG that will take up probably 60 to 80 hours of your time, depending on what you do. And that is something I was not expecting. So that can be a positive, that could be a negative thing, depending on who you ask. For me, I was not expecting it, to be honest. So it was definitely a surprise as I kept playing through, and it just kind of kept going on. Not in a bad way by any means. I just wasn't expecting it to be so long. Fantasian follows the story of Leo as well as a bunch of other characters, but Leo is our main guy here, who is he has amnesia, which is a little funny. I mean, that is such a trope with JRPGs, but I think they do it well here. And I won't get too into story stuff here, but just know there's like alternate universes and realms and stuff, and it gets very, very crazy, like you would expect from a classic JRPG. This game feels like something out of the SNES or PS1 era. Absolutely. This is very much a classic JRPG from the creator of Final Fantasy, with a soundtrack composed by Nobuo Uematsu, the original composer of Final Fantasy. They got back for this game, and it really does feel like a classic RPG with some modern gameplay twists, I would say. The world of Fantasian is very cool. There's this whole thing called Bacteria kind of plaguing everything. I think all of this is really cool conceptually. There are times where I feel like some of the supporting cast or like other party members you get throughout the game are pretty weak, though. Kina, Cheryl, Zinniker, like, there are some really great characters in this game, but I do think a couple of them not as interesting as the others, but I think that is true for a lot of RPG casts. So go into it knowing that, like, the story and world are very cool conceptually. Some of the characters are great. Some of them are a little weaker. Overall, I will say, like, this game is split up into two parts, or at least it was on Apple Arcade, and you can very much tell when that happens. For the first 25, 30 hours, it is an extremely, extremely linear game. Like, I'm talking Final Fantasy 13 tier hallways, right? But then it opens up a ton. You can do some more grinding. You can kind of take some of the main quests in any order you'd like. You get access to the full world map, so it opens up a lot. You get a lot more side quests in that second part. The story in the second half of the game, like, I was invested in, like, the core of the story, but there's a lot of, like, sub-stories that are also main plot that, like, there are definitely times in this game where I was like, okay, I don't really care about what's happening. I'll be honest. The overarching, like, main plot with the villains, I think, is great. I think, like I said, the realm stuff and the Bacteria, like, this is all conceptually very cool, but there are definitely times where I was like, okay, I'm not that invested in what's going on here, I will be honest. Neo Dimension, this new console version, does add voice acting, which I guess the Apple Arcade version did not have, and it's pretty good. Some performances are definitely better than others. Like, there's this one guy named Sid, funnily enough, who runs a tavern, and I think his voice it does not fit the type of character that he is, or maybe it's my image of Sid from Final Fantasy, but I feel like his voice does not fit Sid. It does not feel right. But then you have voices like Kina and Cheryl and Leo, and I think they do a great job. So I'm very glad they added voice acting. This game is very dialogue heavy. There is a lot of exposition in this game. Sometimes they tell story through literally just like novel-esque, like little, I don't even know. It literally just, like, the text pops up on screen. There's, like, some, like, concept art in the background, and there will be, like, this narration kind of just telling you some backstory or something. And at first, I thought the entire story was going to be told that way, right? Like, I was like, oh, this is going to be the entire way the story is presented. It gets a lot less like that later on, because at a certain point, you've learned all the backstory there really is to learn, at least for the most part. But yeah, early on, there's a lot of exposition through just, like, very novel-esque narration, which is cool. But I'm glad it wasn't the entire game. You know, that would have gotten a little old, I think. But yeah, I'm really glad they added voice acting to this version. Let's talk about the combat, though. I think the combat is where Fantasian Neo Dimension, for me, really, really shines. And for me, is where I think it becomes like a sleeper hit. The world, the characters, the story, that's all fine. I think it's all right overall. But the combat in Fantasian Neo Dimension is fantastic. So the way it works is you have your three characters lined up on the left side of the screen, right? And you use a line to aim and target enemies. Some moves hit in a straight line, like Leo. Most of his attacks are just a straight line, right? Some can kind of curve. If it's like a magic spell, that can kind of curve and hit enemies at an angle. And then there's also attacks that go through enemies that hit several at once. Some attacks are like a ball that drop down and kind of do like a big radius, circular radius of damage. It's overall like not that complex, right? It is pretty basic turn-based combat, aim and shoot, really. But it's a lot of fun aiming your moves properly and experimenting with different setups. It makes the combat very engaging, trying to hit as many enemies at once. Especially with the dimension system, this is something that I had heard about going in, but I was really surprised seeing it in actual play. So this game does have random encounters. It's very old school in that way. Every 10 steps, you're going to get into a random encounter. However, Leo has this like dimension device that will basically send random encounters to another dimension. So if you're exploring and you don't feel like fighting at the moment, you can just send all of the random encounters to another dimension. But once it fills up, you have to fight all of them, and it caps at 30 enemies. So you have these really fun sections where you were just going through and having like a gauntlet almost of fighting 30 enemies in a row. It's a really cool twist on having turn-based encounters, like having that in there, but also having a way to clear them out a lot faster. Later on in the game, you can just pay to like erase it if you don't feel like grinding or something. But I really, really like this. It's not turning off random encounters. You still have to, you know, pay the price eventually, right? Like you will fight these enemies, but it added an interesting layer to grinding that I hadn't really seen before, where yeah, in a lot of RPGs you just kind of run around and run into a random encounter, kill the enemy. In this, you run around for like 3 minutes, fill up that dimension gauge, and then fight 30 enemies at once. It is extremely fun, and the characters are a lot of fun to use. All of them have a lot of different cool abilities, magic abilities, that kind of thing, elemental abilities, and enemies will have certain elemental weaknesses. The combat is extremely fun. I think this is by far the highlight of the game, and this is something that even, you know, 60 hours in, you're not getting tired of this, frankly. I at least I wasn't, right? So I highly recommend you check it out, if nothing else, just to see the combats for this game, because I think the combat is superb. I think it is a ton of fun. With that being said, I do have an asterisk on this. Not necessarily a negative, but I can see some people getting frustrated. So throughout my playthrough, I'm doing most side quests, right? Like I'm doing most of the side quests that pop up. If I could figure out where to go, I wasn't using a guide or anything. This game has insane difficulty spikes. If you don't grind, right? Like if you don't grind, if you don't do the side quests, which maybe will give you certain gems or equipment that make your character stronger, there are boss fights in this game that are so frustrating. Frankly, frustrating to the point like I have not felt in a long time while playing a JRPG. There are some boss fights that almost feel unfair in the way they're designed, depending on what you're doing. There are some points in the game in the second half where you are forced to use a party member, and of course, at a certain point, you unlock like these growth charts, and you have like all these skills and things you can unlock using skill points, which I was surprised by because you don't unlock that until like 25 hours in. There are times where they'll force you to use a character. In one instance, at the very least, there was a situation where you needed to have a move that is on the skill tree, and I didn't have that move, so I just had to like turn my game off. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna load up, and I had to redo my skill tree and everything to get that move. The bosses, you really can't just like brute force. You kind of have to have that strategy, and they're almost like a puzzle in a way. So go into it knowing that eventually the bosses become kind of frustrating and kind of irritating, but in a way that's very satisfying when you do solve it and figure it out. They are like puzzles, so it's not something you can just grind and blindly brute force. You have to kind of have the right equipment on and really min-max your characters to make sure you can do it. I guess overall, yes, it's an RPG. You can just grind and level up, and eventually, sure, you can brute force it, but I don't know how much you'd have to grind for some of these bosses to just overpower them with sheer willpower, right? So go into it knowing that some of the bosses are very hard. I was surprised, man. I was surprised going into this game, and you know, the first 20 hours, first linear part of the game, no real issues. But once you get to that open part, if you aren't doing literally every single side quest, you're gonna have some trouble with the combat in this game and the boss fight specifically. Of course, you've been seeing the gameplay this entire time, but on top of the combat, I think the second best part of Fantasian is the presentation. So if you've not seen this game before, maybe this is your first time, maybe you clicked on this video and you have no idea what Fantasian was until now. This game uses real-life miniatures that the team made and then they put like models on it. So everything you see in this game is a real thing that the team made using miniatures, and it looks absolutely beautiful, unlike anything I've really ever seen in a video game. You have so many great areas that like it's really impressive stuff, man. Like it looks visually beautiful. You can see like all the texture on the ground. You can see like the bacteria is made out of like little fuzz balls and stuff like that. It looks absolutely gorgeous the way it is presented. The 3D models of the characters kind of look awkward on top of it, right? Because the backgrounds and everything look so incredible. And then you have these 3D models. I'm not sure if I love the design of a lot of the characters, the way they look. They look a little like, the 3D models look kind of cheap, but I think that's only in contrast to the incredible environments you're going on. I mean, there's this big boat in the game called the Uzra, and it is a real ship they made, and it looks so incredible. And, you know, going into it, like I said, I was expecting like a 20-30 hour game. Getting it to be a 60-70 hour game and seeing just how many areas there are. Yes, you go back to old areas a lot, and you're doing side quests there, maybe some more story stuff happens back on the boat or something, but the amount of areas I was totally impressed by. I thought because they did miniatures for everything, that must mean it can't be that long, right? Like there can't be that many areas, but I was constantly surprised by how much time must have gone into making these environments. I mean, you have these grassy plain areas, but they're all like, they have like these bridges and all that stuff. And it's like, well, when you play it, you have to kind of think, well, that's a real like model somebody made. It's not a 3D model. It's a real physical thing that someone owns and they put it in their garage now. And that is so cool to me. This game looks absolutely beautiful. And, talking about the soundtrack real quick, I think it's, there's something funny about this game. So Nobuo Uematsu did the soundtrack, of course, and I think he did a great job. I think it's not his strongest work, but I think it's a very good soundtrack. Neo Dimension on console adds Final Fantasy battle themes. And I feel like that almost feels a little disrespectful in some cases. Like they have like stuff that he didn't do for Final Fantasy in there. I think his battle theme in this game is not as good as anything else on that list, which it feels bad to say that, but it's almost like they knew that the battle theme was weak for this game. I'm not saying it's bad, but like when I can put Endwalker music or I believe it's Shadowbringers or sorry, Dawn Trail, when I can put Final Fantasy 16's music in there, I'm gonna put that music on instead. I tried not to for a very long time. They do have like a randomized button, so you can have like some different battle themes every encounter, right? Which is nice. But to me, it feels a little weird to have this game. I believe Uematsu said it is going to be his final like full soundtrack that he does. To have it be his final full soundtrack and then to be like, well, actually, you can just listen to music that wasn't composed by him. That feels a little weird to me, But overall, I think the soundtrack is very good. I do think the battle theme is a little weak, though, compared to some of the stuff he's done in the past, of course. Overall, though, I really, really enjoyed my time with Fantasian Neo Dimension, and I have not seen many people talking about it, and that makes me sad because I do think it is one of the best JRPGs of the year. It's just, it came out at a weird time, and it is extremely long. No going into it that this is a long game. It's not like Persona 5 length, but it's up there with Metaphor in terms of my playtime. So go into it knowing that, and go into it knowing that you are in for a classic SNES, PS1 era JRPG. The story feels right from that era, and the gameplay, I really think the gameplay and the presentation is where it shines the most. I think the Dimension system is a lot of fun, and just kind of racking up 30 enemies and then slaying them all at once. Like it's just so much fun that the combat, usually with a game that long, I get tired of the combat. And I said this in my Metaphor review, I never got tired of the combat in Metaphor, and I really didn't get tired of the combat and in Fantasian. There is difficulty spikes, absolutely, but overcoming those difficulty spikes it was really satisfying, sometimes it's just frustrating, and I think some people will go into this and maybe just get frustrated by the bosses, but for me, it was really satisfying overcoming those obstacles, and it made it feel like a classic experience. So I definitely recommend this game if you can find it. Maybe don't pay full price for it, but maybe get it on sale or something. I do have my physical copy here. Once again, shout out to Square Enix for the PS5 code. I will say, apparently the Switch load time's not the best. There are a lot of load screens in this game. I was playing on PS5, so I didn't really experience that, but the Switch version I've heard has some load issues. I also did have my game crash a couple times on PS5. I believe they just rolled out a patch today when I'm recording, so maybe that fixes that. But make sure you save often, because I lost some progress at one point because it crashed, and that was not fun. But hopefully they already fixed that. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think of Fantasian and Neo Dimension? Are you planning on picking it up, or maybe you already have? And also, like I said, let me know if you got that Dragon Quest III Steam code in the comments down below. As always, folks, thank you so much for watching. Of course, subscribe here for more reviews as well as collecting content. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and check out my Nintendo news channel at BoTalksGames as well. Until next time, folks. Peace.